Anita said, I've come here to share a story with you. It is unlike any that you've probably heard today, and I know you've had a pretty intense day so far, and I'm not going to make it any easier on you. I'm going to tell you about how I grew up, where I ended up in my life, and how I got to be here sharing that story with you today. Do we have any Cooper City people out there? Yay, nay? Some? Well, I grew up far out in Cooper City and Miramar, very close to the Miami-Dade border when 75 wasn't even out there. And I'm not telling you how old I am. When I grew up out there, it was such a rural area. You know, there were no houses right next to each other, no apartments, everything was pretty far apart. And the whole neighborhood was essentially white. There was no diversity. And I started out my childhood thinking that I had a normal childhood. My parents were very strict on me from an early age. I had to be a super achiever. A's and B's were the only grades accepted, but they preferred A's. They sent me to 2 different religious schools, and from a pretty early age, I felt an awful lot of pressure weighing down on me. I, as an adolescent, didn't fit in so well. I was the kid that got made fun of. I have always struggled my entire life with my weight. I lose weight, I gain weight, and people were cruel to me. I was called names. I was, the butt of several jokes. I had been spit on. And I had some other things go on in my life that I thought were normal that kind of started to shape the way I looked at the world around me. My parents were prejudiced. They told me things like, as your parents will love you and support you no matter what you do, but you never, never bring home a black person. Never bring home another woman, because those are the things that will make us break that bond. So from a pretty young age, I had all this pressure weighing down. I had these ideas from my family that I was better, that we were better because of the color of our skin. So by the time I got to middle school, I really didn't fit in anywhere. I went from going to a private school that whole time and not really having, the experiences that my peers were having. So when I got there, I had no idea what to expect, no idea what I was doing, and I heard about all kinds of things that I'd never heard about before. Other 11 and 12-year-olds talking about drinking and doing drugs and having sex. And I wanted to fit in because I didn't. I was the girl that got bullied. By the time I got into the 7th grade, all this pressure just kept building and building. I had nobody to talk to. It was like I had no voice. I was disenfranchised. I didn't know where to turn. I started to turn some of that anger on myself. I would burn myself and cut myself and do things to try to alleviate that emotional pain that I was going through. So here I am in the 7th grade. I'm an adolescent girl, wearing my training bra. I'm pudgy. I don't like myself at all. And I go in my history class one day and made the mistake of sitting in the wrong chair. The school bully came in, and she was another girl that was 3 times my size. She told me to get out of her chair. It was her chair. And I was scared. I got up. I tried to move my seat. I didn't want an argument or a fight. I didn't even want anybody to look at me or notice me. And she did something that changed me in a really bad way. 7th grade, she ripped my shirt open in front of the entire class. Now, that was a horrible, horrible experience. And I thought about another saying that I heard at home. My parents always told me, you better never, ever start a fight with anyone. But if anyone ever lays their hands on you or starts a fight with you, if you don't fight back and win that fight, you're going to get it even worse at home. And I have to tell you, when my shirt came open and that whole class was laughing and pointing and, look what happened to me, people crowding in from the hallway, I snapped completely. And I fought. I fought back. I beat up the bully. And from that moment on, I decided I would never allow myself to be humiliated in that way again. So I became the new bully. I figured if I picked on other people before they got a chance to do it to me, then I wouldn't have to feel that way again. I would never have to go through it. So from that point on, violence was a part of my life. I was angry, and that anger seeped out in every aspect of my life. Also during that time, I went through some stuff that unfortunately is pretty common today. My parents were divorcing, my family was being split up. So with all this anger, building up, I started doing things to try to make myself feel better. Things I had no business at that age doing, things I didn't understand. I didn't understand the repercussions, the consequences. At a very young age, I started experimenting with drinking and drugs and sex. And I did all these things trying to feel better. And I didn't realize that with each act, with each thing I did to act out or to try to feel better, I was stripping myself of my humanity. And I got to a point where I had chopped myself down so low, I couldn't see anything that I liked. And when I got to the point that I couldn't like anything in myself, I did the same thing to other people. So I actively started to dehumanize other people. I bullied relentlessly. And when I got into high school, I was still trying to, find that place to fit in. How do I get rid of this anger? What am I going to do? How do I get people to like me or love me? So I went around, to a bunch of different groups trying to see where I fit. I hung out with kids that did drugs and skipped school, and that didn't seem like a really good fit. I hung out with kids that were in gangs. That ended really badly. I eventually hooked up with this group that started out as kind of like punk rockers. They dressed differently. They wore a lot of black and, different things on their clothing, anarchy symbols. And at first I thought, okay, they're kind of cool. People pay attention to them. But eventually they ditched those anarchy symbols and they started wearing swastikas instead. Although I wasn't raised necessarily to be an open-minded person, it wasn't the prejudice that I learned at home that drove me to them. What did it was the anger and the fact that I could hang out with them and be as angry as I wanted to be. And they didn't judge me. They accepted me for who I was. But eventually, though, the ideas and beliefs that they had, they did start to intrigue me because I looked at them and how they acted and how people treated them, and I didn't realize that when people moved away from them or, stepped out of the way so they didn't have to have contact, I thought, hey, look, people respect them. They're, afraid of them. And I took those feelings and didn't realize that I was making a big mistake. People didn't respect them. They were disgusted. So eventually, I'm going through high school, getting more and more violent, and I start to meet older skinheads, the ones that actually, introduce these younger people into it. And they started giving me, flyers, papers, books. And I didn't really consider myself a gullible person or very naive. So I took, a lot of these books and read them and started taking in the information. And I thought, these are real books that are published. They're sold in some bookstores, so they must be real. And I started to take all those beliefs and internalize them. And it helped me turn all that anger and gave me reasons to direct it at other people. Essentially, I walked around thinking I was better because of the color of my skin. That because I spoke English, because I acted a certain way and looked a certain way, that I was better than everyone. So I get involved in this and I become even more violent. Years of my life start to go by. I go from an angry 15-year-old to an angry young adult. I dropped out of school, so I had no education, no real skills, no goals. I sat around and pretty much did what I wanted and got into fights and picked on people and tried to bring other people into these groups with me. When I was 19, something happened. I'm sure you've all at least heard of it. It was the Oklahoma City bombing. And when it initially happened, we saw the destruction on the news. But right in that beginning, we didn't know why it happened, who did it, why they did it. And I sat there and I saw all these horrible images on the news. There was no escape from it. It was a massive, horrible atrocity. And there was this one picture that I saw that I will probably be haunted by it for the rest of my life. If you look it up online, I'm sure you'll find this picture. It's a picture of a fireman carrying a baby. And the baby has dirt and blood on her, and you don't know if she's alive or dead. And then I realized that it was somebody just like me that did that and committed an act of hatred to such an extent that children died and human beings died. So I had to stop and ask myself, is this what I really want? This is what my life is going to turn into? What if I have kids? Am I going to put them in those kind of situations or be taken away from them because I'm committing those kind of acts? So I made a half-hearted decision not to hang out with my friends anymore and not to go out and do the things we usually did. As honest as I can be, I have to just say that I didn't have the courage to walk away. What I was involved in isn't something that you wake up one day and say, I changed my mind, I don't want to do this anymore, see you later. And those friends that I thought I had, they had a message for me. I found that message in the bullet holes in my building, in the car that was parked in front of the building, in the subtle reminders they gave me that they knew my family. They knew where they lived, they knew their names, my siblings. I didn't have the courage. So instead of leaving, I decided I was going to be an even better skinhead and a better racist because I had to prove at that point, I really do want to be here. I wasn't trying to leave. So I went out and became the same person that handed me the flyer and the book. I went out and found people that were just like me, that maybe were misfits, that were feeling bad and didn't feel like they belonged anywhere. And I would say, don't you want to do something important with your life? I can give you that. I can tell you how to do the most important thing ever. I recruited young people, older people, sometimes entire families. And again, years of my life were just slipping by and I was still involved in the same things. But I had added to my violence. I had started getting arrested, sometimes for small offenses like going out and getting drunk and being obnoxious and, calling people names. But then it progressed. And each time I got arrested, those friends that I thought I had, they would stop and say, look what she's willing to do. She's willing to go out there and scream at the top of her lungs. This is how much she believes in this. So they kind of egged me on. And I needed that attention because I felt like I'm doing something. People like me. I eventually went out one night with a group of skinheads. And we drove around talking about what was okay to do to people that weren't like us. There were things that we read that told us we can rob people that aren't white. We can use violence against them. We can do whatever we want because we're better. So at the age of 23, I found myself sitting in the federal detention center in Miami. I went out that night and I sat in this car full of other skinheads, other racists, and I knew that one of them was going to go in and rob a store. A store that we specifically chose because we thought maybe it'll be somebody Jewish that owns this store, or some other race that we don't like. So I sat in that prison thinking, how can I really be in trouble? I didn't go in the store. I didn't hold that gun. And then it dawned on me, eventually, that I deserved to be in that prison just as much as the man that went in and held the gun and hit the clerk and took his money. So at the age of 23, me having lived all these years being this violent, aggressive, tough person, I was petrified because I was now alienated. I didn't have those so-called friends. I felt alone and thought, I'm going to have to actually meet people that I would have hated, possibly attacked or been horrible to, and I was scared. But the strangest thing started to happen. The first was that my entire life, I spent my life blaming everything I did on other people. I picked a fight with you because my parents got divorced and I'm mad. I beat you up because you looked at me funny. It's not my fault. I learned in that prison that I had to take responsibility for my words and my actions, and I knew without a doubt that I deserved to be there. The second thing that I really had to pay attention to and realize was that my entire life, I never liked myself. I had no self-respect, I had no confidence. When I looked in the mirror, it was way more than having a bad hair day, or not liking the way I looked, or how much weight I had gained or lost. I didn't like the person that I was inside. And I knew that if I couldn't do that for myself, there was no way I could do it for another person. And something else happened there that I really never expected. There were women in that prison from all over the world. And yes, they were other criminals that had broken laws and they were being punished for it. But those women, not every one of them, but quite a few of them treated me with kindness and compassion, even though they knew I was in prison for a hate crime. They judged me not by my past, not by what laws I broke to get there. They treated me like a human being when I never would have given them that same respect before. And I started to change inside. And I started to like the feeling of those changes. And when I started feeling those changes, I wanted to do nice things for other people. I got the opportunity to do that in prison. When you go to jail or prison, you have to have a job and you have to get an education if you don't have a high school diploma. So I got a job in the education department, and I did things like grade papers and help people with stuff that I knew how to do for the teacher. And it was a class preparing women to take their GED tests. There was a small group of women that sat in the back of the classroom. The teacher never made them work. They didn't do the same thing that the other students did. And finally one day I asked her, why don't they do anything? And she very simply said, they can't read, they can't write, I don't have time, I will never be able to teach them what they need to know, they're never going to pass this test. So I said, can I try? She allowed me to take them to an empty class every day there was class. And I was able to teach them basic things I had always taken for granted. How to write their names, how to address an envelope, how to read a little bit of a letter that maybe a loved one sent them, how to add and subtract. And I never told them, but the gift was for me. I had never in my life done something selflessly for another human being. And to be able to do that gave me the confidence to know that I could be different. So, at the end of my 3 years, getting ready to be released, I'm petrified. I have no goals, I have no education, what am I going to do? A couple months after I was released back down here in South Florida, I started at Broward College. And I started with a degree that I thought maybe possibly I can get a job. It was something technical. And one day one of the deans said, this isn't what you want to do. If you could do anything you wanted, what would it be? And I said I would use my experiences to try to make a difference and help other people. And she said, so what's stopping you? Do it. And I changed my major. For 2 years I sat through this exact program. and I didn't have the courage to speak to anyone and tell them about my life or my experiences. Thankfully, I had a teacher that was willing to intervene and talk to the president of the college, who called and talked to Rosita. And even knowing the person that I was, the things that I had done, Rosita and Rita and another woman said, "I forgive you. I forgive you for what you did, and we're proud of you for what you're doing now." So that's been a decade coming to this program. I also have worked myself silly to get an education. I did 3 degrees back to back and went to college for 8.5 years. My brain could not hold any more after all of that. And I do things like this today. I come and share my story because I need to make amends, and I know that I'm not the only one that ever felt those things and ever felt, like I had no confidence and like I needed to belong and I wanted to be accepted. And what I really want to share with all of you today is that we all have the ability to do that, to make what we might think is the smallest difference can have a huge ripple effect and create positive change in so many other lives. Now, I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and I'm not going to lie, the first one's pretty tough. It's hard to admit an answer in front of a whole group of your peers and other people. But I promise you, I'll be the first one to raise my hand. How many of us in here have ever laughed at, told a joke about, made fun of somebody because of how they looked, where they came from, the language they spoke, their religion, their sexual identity, their weight, their socioeconomic status, how much of anything they had or didn't have? Thank you all for your honesty. Now, one more. How many of us have ever been made fun of for any of those very same reasons? I don't know about anybody else, but I know that knowing what I went through and what it feels like to be on the receiving end of that, I never, ever want to be responsible for making another human being feel that bad about themselves. I want to be the person that lends the hand and helps someone up. So, be the person that when you hear a joke, when you hear somebody being picked on, be that person that says, "I don't think it's funny. I'm not going to laugh. I'm not going to take part. I'm not going to repeat it." If you look at how many of us are in this room today, and imagine, what if each of us did that one time and 2, 3, 5 people saw you do that? Can you imagine what kind of change that would create? There are a lot of things that we can do that don't cost us anything. We don't have to buy it or sell it. We just have to speak up and use our voices. And before I conclude, I want to say thank you so much to all of the survivors and liberators. After 10 years, it has been such an honor and privilege to share the same space with you. So thank you. And I'm not done yet. How many of you have read the book Night by Elie Wiesel? If you haven't, read it. It's a life changer. There's a passage out of the book that has always stuck with me, and it's something I think about a lot, so I want to share it with you before I conclude. This is taken out of the book, but it was actually from his Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech. Speaking of himself, he says, "I remember he asked his father, 'Can this be true? This is the 20th century, not the Middle Ages. Who would allow such crimes to be committed? How could the world remain silent?' And now the boy is turning to me. 'Tell me,' he asks, 'what have you done with my future? What have you done with your life?' And I tell him that I've tried to keep memory alive, that I've tried to fight those who would forget. Because if we forget, we are guilty. We are accomplices." Thank you.